Hello, and welcome back to Who Are You, a CSI podcast. I am Lauren, and I have seen CSI through and through around 3 to 4 times.
Hi, I'm Nick, and this is my first time watching CSI through.
And today we are going to be reviewing Season 1, Episode 3, Crate and Burial. Director is Danny Cannon. Writers are Anthony E. Zucker. Nope, I've still not looked up how to pronounce his name. Anne Donahue, our first female writer, and Eli Talbert. Original air date was October 20th, 2000. So we start this episode, I guess, slightly different from the first two because the first two were immediately Vegas. This is desert, cut to Vegas for a bit, and then cut to a bunch of desert shots.
Yes, yeah, it was. We're still being reminded that we're in Vegas, but a little bit less.
A little less in our face about it. And we see a guy using a shovel, that's the word, to put dirt on the ground and then kind of pat it down, and then this generic looking guy walks away. We see his boots in one of the cuts.
Yeah, and I remember, I think the notion of the show and the name of the episode kind of gave it away. I just wrote buried alive. What a terrible way to die.
Yeah, no thank you. Yeah, no.
I was, of course, assuming that the person would die at this point.
That's fair. I mean, that's a fair...
Well, I assumed they would be dead.
Generally, the show is about investigating murders, so fair that you would think that the person would be dead.
Is there shouting or anything?
So speaking of person that you thought would be dead, the very next scene as we cut to is a woman in a box. Like, she wakes up, she turns, like, flicks her lighter on and starts screaming.
Yeah. The moment I was like, oh, this person's been buried alive, yeah.
Yep. And then we move over to hearing the ransom audio. And this was my moment of, wow, this show is dated. And I also feel like this might be another instance of, wasn't this even dated for 2000? Where the husband doesn't know about voice alternating technology. Like, he thinks the guy's putting on like a weird fake voice, and Grissom and Nick have to be like, oh no, he's, using a device to change his voice. I feel like we knew what that was in 2000.
Yeah, I mean, if you watched an episode of Dateline, the names and faces have been obscured to hide the identities.
Right.
I talk like, shadowy dude and have a weird voice modulation. So that was definitely in the zeitgeist, but maybe not for like somebody who is like 50 or 60 and is a viewer of the show. You got to kind of walk them through it. Mr. Garris, by the way, is the name of the husband.
Yes, I didn't get that. I jotted that down quite a bit later. So,
yep.
And so Grissom is saying, no, it's not a joke. They're using something to alter his voice, and he's telling the husband, who's understandably agitated, you need to listen closely, you'll hear a lot. And he mentions about hearing nothing, which leads to, where do you hear nothing in Vegas? The desert. The desert's the only place in Vegas where you hear nothing. And Grissom also thinks that he hears power lines.
Yeah, the low humming in the background, he says. Mm-hmm. Right, maybe a power line, which they just sort of move on from. They don't like try to prove that out in the episode.
No, I feel like there's a lot of callbacks in this episode. I kind of jotted them down near the end of the episode. I'm like, oh, that's a callback from earlier. Oh, this is a callback from earlier. That one never really comes up again.
Yeah, they spent a long time on the, like, why do you keep listening to that message over and over again? Mm-hmm. Listen carefully. And then he's just kind of like, well, we'll set it up in the lab.
Yep, like, don't worry about it. We'll worry about it later.
Sometimes if you listen closely, you can hear a lot. I don't hear anything. Right. Where do you hear nothing in Las Vegas? The desert. And judging by what sounds like a low-frequency buzz in the background, possibly near power lines. How'd you hear all that? I listen.
Jim Brass, I want to say James Brass because you called him James in the first episode. Jim Brass,
it's what
our
it says
detective.
On his name on his desk.
Which is fair.
And I wrote Brass is back, ? And through the whole episode, I'll tell you, I still couldn't figure out if he was supposed to be back working with Grissom or if Grissom was still in charge of his little CSI department, or if he was just playing the role as being demoted to another thing. But this was not homicide, which is where they said he was sent last time.
I think they said he was sent down to being a detective.
Yeah, they
I
said
don't know if they said homicide
they
detective.
did in the first, in the last episode.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah, he said homicide, but maybe he negotiated since then.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just like a high profile case, and they're like, yeah, I mean, you're basically our best detective because you are basically a captain.
Yeah, and I will also say regarding Jim Brass, he comes off as an asshole in this scene.
See, I think he has been a bit of an asshole for the last couple episodes. I think I've mentioned that a
I
couple
think you
times.
have. I feel like
And
he
I
really
think,
shines in his assholeness in this
yeah.
episode.
So, but I also think that maybe they'll be moving away from that. I think actually they probably move away from a bit in this episode. So he's like, sometimes he's very obstinate.
Hmm.
And then at other times he's a little social. So
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see, but glad to see Brass is back.
Yep, he's back, and then Grissom, tells the husband if you want to go fast, you have to go slow, which is easy to say when it's not your wife who's being ransomed.
Yeah,
Like
it's
he's just
like,
basically like, chill out, man. Don't worry. Like we'll get to it. We got to go slow. And here's this husband feeling like I have a few hours until this strange voice is saying that my wife is going to be killed if I don't pay up. I don't have the luxury of going slow. Like none of them
yeah.
seem to have any empathy for this gentleman whatsoever.
They have like a few hours, they've said, right?
Yes.
And
I think it was
like,
3 hours.
yeah, and
Something
then
like
like
that.
he's sitting there listening to the tape. He's got to, why are they not rushing this back to the lab? They can't email it. They're not, they're going to have to get in a car and drive, and then someone's going to have to work on it. And so, yeah, it's weird. They move relatively slow for what is such a tight window. And then
We go to credits.
yeah, we get our credits, which let's say I didn't watch it. I didn't make any notes about it.
It's fine. I mean, you could skip
at the end
credits.
of them, the end
if
of
you want
them,
to.
I was like, oh, I was supposed to pay attention to see if there were any new scenes.
Nah.
Well, I told myself I wanted to pay attention, so I'll have to keep an eye out for things.
Yeah. And so then we pop on over to Sarah arriving at the scene, which I actually realized on my second watch through that we don't know that this is the kidnapping scene until later. Like this could have been crime B, and we don't really know that.
Oh, that's funny. I never thought that at any point. I don't know, because she wasn't in the first scene. Although I did write down Seidel, Stokes, and Grissom in my notebook, but that was probably after this scene because I don't have the timeline for it. I was just sort of like, who's working this case?
Yeah.
Because all three of them end up working this case.
Nick arrives. They kind of have a little like playful spat about whose crime scene it is and who's like lead CSI and who's handpicked by Grissom.
Oh, you got audio. I wanted that.
Yeah, I wanted that.
But then all it is like go back and hand it to somebody else. Why would you want that?
And have Grissom on your butt the whole time, like you're missing something, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because obviously we don't care how long it takes to find this woman.
I mean, I think we all know that Sarah wouldn't need that. She's all like, she's tech savvy, so like she would be the first one.
She would have been on it.
To be like, can you isolate this? Can you try this? Can you do that?
And then Sarah notices, after their little playful spat, Sarah walks down the hallway and notices scratches on the door frame. And spoiler alert, again, we see this every episode, but watch the episode and then listen to this. This is one of the callbacks.
Yeah. Well, they spend a long time. Disturbance on here, disturbance on here. And then she gets to the scratches and she stares at them for an uncomfortably long time. And I'm like, oh, these scratches, they're coming back. And I was also kind of like, how does somebody make scratches leading back into the bedroom? And it kind of like makes sense at the end of the episode, obviously. But very early on, I was kind of like, there is something suspicious about this. And I was like, I didn't know quite what they were trying to tell you, but it was like, what's going on here?
We find out later in the episode.
Yes, we do. So there's a conversation. I don't know when it happens.
Okay.
Between Grissom and Stokes. And he's like, oh, you've been level 3 for 3 weeks now. And I realize we've actually, because the first two episodes take place in like 48 hours. We've actually skipped some time here.
Yes.
So to give you an idea, because everyone has to sort of cope with what's happened, and as we'll see in a little bit, work is coming back, and so, but that was an interesting, like, subtle way to tell the audience how much time has passed since the last episode.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I can't remember exactly when that is either. I didn't want to make all the paper noises by flipping my notebook around, so I might have jotted it down in my notes. I might not have jotted it down on my notes. We pop over to Jim Brass interviewing the husband, Mr. This is where I got his name. I was like, Mr. Garris, question mark?
Mm-hmm.
Husband, again, understandably, wants to pay the ransom.
Yeah, is this when he goes like, "You're telling me not to pay the ransom" or something?
Is that?
That might be
Hold on.
later.
That might be
I
later.
feel
I
like
think that's
later.
I think that's later.
Yeah.
The whole I want to pay the ransom, no, you shouldn't pay the ransom happens a few times in this
Right.
episode. So I think that specific conversation happens a little bit later. And we quickly pop over to Grissom giving Nick instructions on the audio. So I think this is what you were talking about. I think this is when he's saying you've only been, a CSI level 3 for a few weeks. Go back, really look over this, in the lab, and I think this is where that happens.
Yep.
And we go on over to Grissom and Sarah in the bedroom of the kidnapping/ransom case, and not only does Jim Brass not come across great in this episode, neither does Grissom.
No.
Sarah's talking to him, and she's like, "Oh, sorry, like, am I interrupting you?" Because he's, like, obviously in another zone. And with no compassion, he's like, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. I barely heard you."
Yeah, I was like, I wouldn't have listened to you anyways or something. Like, I wasn't listening to you anyways. It is just like, I thought you, liked this person. Like, you respected them.
Right. You
And
handpicked them
then
to
it's
do
like-
the Warwick investigation,
it's
and
like-
now you're treating her like garbage.
And she's like, basically going like, what are you looking at? And he's like, dirt.
Dirt.
He's like, yeah, well, what about it? He's like, well, I don't know anything yet. Let's walk outside.
Yeah, and Sarah smells something that she asks Grissom if he's wearing bad cologne, and he
Yeah.
says no, because that can interfere with, like, crime scenes, so he doesn't wear any cologne. And then that's when they walk outside, and they find the rag that is not chloroform.
Halothol is, I think, what they call it.
Yes, halofol is what they call it. That's what they think. Like, they have to go run it in trace to confirm, but that's what they think. And they
didn't
also
catch
notice that there's
the-
no dirt outside.
I did not catch the perfume remark the first time walking. Or I didn't.
Oh, the bad cologne?
I registered, but I watched it the second time and I said, oh, they're alluding to being able to smell what's coming off of the rag.
Yes.
That's why they're like, oh, it's not chloroform because it doesn't smell like that. Yeah, and then there's like a slate patio and gravel outside.
Yep, but no dirt.
So the dirt is not from directly outside, and so they demise the dirt likely came off the shoe
of the killer.
Kidnapper. There's also a whole conversation about when Sarah does her walkthrough that Grissom doesn't listen to, but he apparently was listening to it because that he remarks that if this was a professional, which she said it's kind of like a professional job, he would not have left the rag. However, I think we'll find out it kind of reality was kind of a professional job because we find out they intentionally leave the rag behind.
Yes.
Later on in the episode, and so I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, from there we head on over to crime scene B, which is hit and run accident involving a young girl, and Catherine remarks that she was hit while she was riding one of those scooters, which were definitely the thing in 2000.
Razor scooters?
Yeah, the Razor scooters. I don't think it had like the brand Razor on it, but the Razor scooters were, again, for our younger listeners, they used to be the jam back in probably late 1990s, early 2000.
Razor did not pony up enough money for the ad placement for this
ad
episode.
Yes, we did not get an ad for this episode.
I do have
Razor
an ad.
missed out. Razor really missed out on this one.
I do have an ad sponsorship later.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so we did not miss out on one. So Catherine denotes that her daughter Lindsay wants one. We move over to Warwick calling the scene, basically saying what he thinks happened. So there's a bit of a reenactment there.
And they do a bit of like hey, are you okay? Because, Catherine has a daughter, she, going to be okay with the scene. And then also like, Warwick, hey, are you okay? And
she asks if he's turning over a new leaf.
Yeah. And so they have this sort of like, all right, we're going to get back to normal work, now, right? And yeah, so then he calls the scene. There's not anything shocking there.
No.
In calling the scene. I think one of the things they remark about is like there's like 20 million cars that are going to have the same color paint as whatever.
Yes, because at this stage in the investigation, all they have is the paint. And that's not going to be enough to go off of to find the vehicle involved in this hit and run. So then, so the next scene is when we move to Jim Brass, strongly suggesting that Mr. Garris not pay the ransom.
Yes. Yeah, I wrote that down. Husband paying ransom. I thought that was like, why'd you call the police, man? Right?
Yeah.
If you were going to pay the ransom. I mean, maybe he talked to the police and realized they weren't going to be successful and then he was paying the ransom. But he was just like, hey, dude, I got the money. I'm going to pay this ransom.
Yeah.
And then he takes off.
Then then Grissom is investigating the dirt that he could not hear Sarah when she was talking because the dirt was so fascinating, and determines that it's dirt from a gold mine and that there are 3 mines near the money drop site. So they've already determined where they're going to drop the money off of. So they're thinking, well, this person to go get the money is not going to have the body that far from where the money pickup / drop off is. So it has to be from a gold mine near where they're dropping the money off.
I have one comment. This comment falls in the category of Nick knows too many random facts. One of the random facts that I'm keenly aware of is that we mine gold from places where they take cubic yards of dirt for the tiniest little morsel of gold, and it's profitable. The amount of dirt of gold that they were showing in the microscope for that much dirt, I want to go buy this land in Nevada.
You're I'll take
why
this
did
mine.
we stop mining this mine? Because it is a literal gold mine. Yeah, the amount of dirt, the amount of gold that was in there. And then I think they were saying, so yeah, the cyanide is the gray, and they use that to leach gold out of, they actually use it to leach gold out of rocks.
Okay.
So they crush the dirt up.
Yep.
They mix it with cyanide. I think it dissolves, it helps, not really dissolve, but pull the gold out, and then they can process it.
Nick here with all of your fun facts.
You couldn't feasibly spread enough cyanide across the soil and try to leach gold up from feet below. I mean, first off, you'd kill yourself handling that much cyanide, but also it would be so expensive. Yeah, I learned a lot about mining from some YouTube channels, but I also learned a lot about mining in the West from a YouTube channel where this guy bought a ghost town, and they mine silver and stuff. But you start doing research, you learn a lot. But other than that, I don't have any problems with this scene.
That was my one problem.
You got to show the gold. You know what I mean? I get that it's a visual effect,
right,
for the audience.
Yeah, it wouldn't be as powerful if it was oh, see this gold that you can't see because it's such a minute amount that even our microscope can't pick it up. Probably wouldn't have had the same effect. We go to a bit of a darker scene with the coroner working on the body of the girl who was killed in the hit and run, and they find out that the bruise on her has a partial plate number, including the number 4 and the letter J.
Yes, and they don't really get into this. I wonder if there was this is one of those, I wonder if they cut a scene, but there's you could imagine okay, you got the accident, you got so many cars in the area, but also based on model of the car, where of the height that the license plate would be at could be different. An SUV and a sedan are going to be very different. And then they still have the paint color.
Yep.
Right? So they know, if it's a gold car or a red car or a black car.
Yeah, so they decide to run the partial plate numbers against cars, I think of that color, within a 5-mile radius of the hit and run is their next plan.
I didn't think they mentioned the color, but presumably they would use all of that information.
Yeah, maybe I just inferred that they used the color as part of that.
I actually at this point was I don't know what they're trying to solve here. I feel like they're just gonna get it. I was like, I don't know where this plot line is going.
Yes, this throws a bit of a curveball from how their normal episode. We fly on over to Grissom and Sarah in a helicopter using heat scanning technology to try to find Mrs. Garris.
Mm-hmm. This seems a little over the top.
I agree.
It's fun.
But it's fun. It's definitely fun. And we go then, so I apologize, audience. There's going to be a lot of jumping back and forth if we want to try to stay with the scenes. The helicopter and the Jim Brass and Nick at the drop site flips back and forth very quickly here. So I'm going to...
In the show, it's happening simultaneously. Because at one point they communicate over the radio, so they're sort of setting this scene.
So they're cutting it very quickly back and forth. So I'll say where the cuts are. There are some scenes in the helicopter that nothing of substance happens. So I'll probably just say hey, they go back to the helicopter for a bit. Okay, we're back to this. So we move on to Jim Brass at the drop site, and then Nick slides into the car with him, and Jim Brass seems not thrilled with this development.
Also, this husband must be the oldest grandpa driver in the world because he left first, and they apparently both beat him there.
Yes.
I know I know they got lights. It doesn't mean they're going to run them. But yeah,
don't be like our mayor and run your lights or the Boston mayor when it's not an emergency.
Yeah.
We go back to the helicopter for a bit. Nothing really happens of substance there. We immediately come back to the drop site, and they see a gentleman in a ball cap approaching the trash bin where the bag was dropped off. And I think I didn't jot this down. I think this is the scene where Nick's like, let's go get him, let's go get him. And Jim Brass is trying to tell him, cool it. We have to make sure he's actually going to go for the
Yep.
bag. We
Yeah,
can't just take him in because he's close to
There
it.
was a dog walker.
Yes, so I think it was the scene before actually.
At first, and then now there's basically they're kind of holding. So just kind of as before they are ready to go, before the guy grabs the bag, then like the helicopter scene kind of plays out.
Yeah, so we are back to the helicopter where Grissom says to swing around, and then he notices like a heat signature below the surface. They land. They're calling for Mrs. Garris. They hear screaming. They start digging, which another for dramatic effect. It's Grissom and Sarah digging with rocks nearby because they don't have shovels, and they're just so desperately trying to. You were looking for a body underneath the ground. Maybe you should have brought shovels with you in the helicopter.
I thought that. And then I realized in the second watch, they had no reason to believe this person was underground. They just thought this person was going to be stashed somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? They never told them, right? They could have been in a trunk of a car or in a building.
Yeah, that's true. Because
right?
they do mention a trunk of a trunk of a car at the beginning of the episode. You're right. Yeah, maybe this is just from watching it enough times where my brain.
I had the same idea, and then I was like, oh, I guess not. So yeah, at first I was like, wait, well, why would you bring a shovel with you?
Just bring a shovel.
Because then all the cops show up and they all have shovels. For some reason.
Backup arrives, shovels in tow.
Yeah, and so I have my first prediction thoughts.
Oh, okay, let's hear
of
it.
this whole episode,
I love it.
which I wrote down a bunch of stuff. So first I went, are these two stories going to be related? Spoiler alert, they are not related.
No,
but then I immediately wrote, or is the husband/wife in on it? Because at this point I was like, what is there to solve in a hit and run? You just rescued the person. No one's even dead in that story. Like I was thinking like, oh, it's going to be like the hit and run because the hit and run, we were just at plate numbers.
Yes.
I was like, maybe when they were running away from the scene, they hit this person and that's going to allow them to figure out something. And that was over there in my head. And I was like, wait, I was like, the husband is definitely not in on this. He would never have called the police. So I immediately scratched off the husband. And then I went like, but like, if the wife isn't on it, why would she be buried in the ground? I was like, she must really be trying to sell it for something.
I feel like she's a great actress here.
But yeah, I wrote, yeah, there's not much to solve in the hit and run. But then after that scene, we'll surely find out what's actually going on with the hit and run.
We will.
Or
so
start to.
They pull her up from the ground. They cut the tape that was around her wrists. And I know that this is probably police lingo, but to me it sounded just like another Grissom, you're not sounding great in this episode when he radios to Captain Brass and says, we got the package.
Yeah.
She's a human being. Again, this is probably lingo, and I'm taking this more personally than I should.
Meanwhile, Sarah's like, I can't believe humans would do this to each other.
Right, and Grissom's just like,
and Grissom's like, we got the package.
We got the package. Yeah. Again, it's probably police lingo, and I'm taking it too personally, but it definitely bothered me. And we head back over to our little Jim Brass, Nick, buddy cop scene with them in the car. They move on the suspect, and the suspect's defense is, why would I want this bag? It's not even leather.
Yes. I wasn't
Not
trying
great.
to get the bag. Not designer or leather or whatever he says. And they're like, oh, I think of 2 million reasons why.
Yeah. Tiger. I think he calls him Tiger. I think he goes,
Oh,
there's
yeah,
2
'cause
million
golfing.
reasons. Tiger.
Because the really big Tiger Woods era golfing at that time. And they were at the
Oh, I
driving
didn't
range.
even, I just thought, like, I know that sometimes Tiger's used as like a
As
pet
like a
name.
sports-
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so not a sports person that my brain did not go there whatsoever.
So where do we go after this scene?
This is when Catherine and Warwick arrive at the house. Well,
That's
we
what
don't
my
know which house.
That's what my old notes indicate.
Yeah, so they arrive at the house. An elderly man whose name is Charles Moore answers.
Mm-hmm.
He claims that his car was stolen. They produce a search warrant for said quote-unquote stolen car, find the car in his garage, which is then when he claims it was an accident.
Yep. And I immediately wrote down, this old man is taking the fall for someone else.
Nick was on it.
We hadn't even met who he could be taking the fall for.
That is true.
So I had no idea. I was thinking like a wife, but I was also then immediately reminded of my theory that the guy in the first episode was taking the fall for his wife. And I went, oh, am I going to fall for this again?
CSI gonna get me again?
I was like, but no, I'm sticking to my guns. This is a better storyline. So what happened is they figured out that that was a better storyline and they ran with it.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. They knew.
Yeah. They
They
heard me
learned.
23 years in the future.
Yes, exactly. That's how they made such a successful show. They could
Yeah.
steal ideas from the future. We pop on over to Warwick at headquarters. The car has been impounded. Grissom walks in, says he bought a chem lab for Lindsay for her birthday.
Oh, okay.
Catherine has a very adamant Lindsay doesn't want a birthday party, and this comes up again later, and I jotted down the note later, so I'll wait until later to bring up this note about this incident. But she has what I think is a fair look. My daughter doesn't want to have a party. We're not going to have a party. Stop asking me about the party.
Oh, I know you're jotted down there.
Yes, I'm sure you do.
I heard that. I was like, what? This is another Grissom doesn't look so good.
No, this is not a good. I love me some Grissom. Like, give me some Daddy Grissom, but not in this. Going back and watching such early episodes is a harsh reminder that he takes a while to bloom in this role. And then all their beepers go off. They go their separate way because something comes up for all of their cases.
They all went off at the same time, and I was trying to remember, like, was that a thing where, like, it was only, like, on regular intervals that people would get their beepers and pagers to go off? But also a good reminder of our beeper episode last week where they used the beeper to track the guy down. Beepers are in full swing.
Yes, they are. Beepers are where it's at. We have a quick scene where Sarah investigates the box/crate that Mrs. Garris was found in, and I believe this is the scene where we see that it's from a winery. I can't remember the name of the winery, but I'm fairly certain.
It says Garris Winery.
Yes.
It has his name on it.
Yeah. So Garris Winery. And then we head over to Grissom interviewing Mrs. Garris at the hospital. She's saying that she got grabbed from behind. She has no idea like where the bruise around her eye came from.
So we have a Spot the guest star moment here.
Ooh, let's do it. Spot. We need to find some audio for Spot the guest star so we can have nice little background music for this segment.
When they pulled her out of the hole, I did not notice it, but at this scene I realized this is the female Vulcan from Enterprise.
Yes, it is.
Actress.
Yes, it is.
And I did look it up to confirm I was right.
I forgot that she was in CSI, but you are correct. That is this. I can't remember her name at the moment.
I don't know. Yeah, I looked it up and I didn't write it down.
Is it T. Paul? Is possibly the character name, but I don't remember the actress's name. And don't at me, Trekkies. I'm a Trekkie, but I'm terrible with details. I have ADHD, so if I'm saying her name wrong, I've only seen like 3 episodes of Enterprise.
Yeah, it was kind of like, wait, I know who that is.
Like, that's
Jolene Blaylock is I guess the actress's name. But yeah, she the top of her IMDb does not mention the 1 episode of.
Oh, crazy! That's weird.
It does, however, mention the 2 episodes of Stargate SG-1. Did we ever mention? I think is the husband in the first episode Billy from Stargate? Was that the origin of Spot the guest star?
No, origin of Spot the guest star was the doctor being from.
Oh yeah. The Asif Mandi is the doctor in the first episode.
Yes.
I actually was never fully sure if the husband from the first episode was in fact from Stargate or not.
I know who you're talking about. I don't know if it's the same person or not.
Yeah. It looks a lot like him, but
now that you mention it, yes, it does.
Michael Shanks is the actor. He played, I called him Billy. I think Billy's the name of the Power Ranger. His name is Dr. Daniel Jackson in Stargate.
Oh, okay. Much more dignified.
And so this episode would have been from 2000. So let's see. Was he in an episode of CSI? Without digging deeply into his thing, I think I was incorrect. Okay. Maybe I did look it up and I realized it was wrong, and so I didn't write it down.
And you just forgot about it. That's fine.
Yeah. Spot the guest star, and then they so jumping back, they're interviewing the wife, and it's kind of a weird scene, right? It hasn't been that long, and they've got the guy, so you think that they would take their time here.
Yeah, this sort of comes up again later where Grissom admits that they don't actually have enough, like they're fairly certain they have the guy, but they don't have the evidence to hold the guy, which then prompts why this is such an immediate need. So Grissom, in that vein, wants a blood sample. The husband's kind of pushing back against this, which I don't blame him. Like you're saying, she basically just got taken out of this crate, if we're to believe the timeline that they're inferring. And he wants her to be able to rest. But she says, no, I want to help. I'll do anything I can. Did this sway your, I think the wife is involved? Or did this add to, I think the wife is involved?
It added to it, but only because of the nature of the way television shows are made. So it made me feel like they're kind of setting it up for it. But it didn't really give me anything else to go on.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. She was like, oh yeah, she did this. And he put a rag around my head, and I was still kind of like, well, if she was in on it, like she would know. You know what I mean? It would all be there. But like I didn't have any. Like I feel like at the end of the episode, spoiler alert, she is in on it.
Again, watch the episode and then
Yes.
listen to this podcast, please.
They cover like all the bits and pieces, and I never really I never really teased them out. I was just kind of like, well, there's got to be more to this story, so I think she's in on it.
Okay, that's fair.
But I think also in this scene you could tell, like, I don't think the husband's in on it, and there's a whole thing about like why would she say or not say something or give someone up, and they kind of cover that at the end of the episode. So they did a good job of that.
Yeah, very quick scene of Sarah lifting Prince off of the crate, and then we immediately jump to Jim Brass interrogating. I put down, because I don't think they mentioned his name yet, or if they did, I didn't catch it. So for quite a few lines in my notebook, I refer to Chip as baseball, because he had a baseball cap on.
Yep.
So I just refer to him as baseball.
He's the
it's
guy.
Chip.
He's guy in my notebook, because I have this whole line that says, "Is the Jim guy a fall guy or the guy?"
Oh, okay. All right. That's a good
But yeah,
question to pose.
After the scene, so Brass has this scene with him, and they interrogate him and ask him some questions.
Yep.
He says he doesn't want a lawyer at the start of the scene. Then at the end of the scene, he apparently has a card for his lawyer in his wallet, and it's like very like criminal mastermindy. Like, haha, yeah, you know I did it. I know I did it, but you're never gonna catch me.
Yeah, they point out that he knows the layout of the house because he's Mr. Garris's personal trainer
and trains at the house.
And trains at the house, and that his prints were on the crate.
Oh yeah, there's a scene where he's like, "Can you explain why your crates?" He says, "Not unless they were like wine crates that I helped move last week." And then I was like, "Well, they would have corroborated that with the husband." So the husband really did have him move some wine crates like the week before, and then maybe it was just like, "Oh, well, I could use a giant body-shaped crate. I have this thing coming up."
Yeah.
I don't know.
So as you already mentioned, he walks out, he gives his lawyer's information to Captain Brass, and then we find out Mr. Captain Brass was being a little sneaky, and he got his voice on audio, which
I would say that he caught the guy on tape, except that this is the product placement for this week's episode, where they very many times this episode from here on forward, they make sure to show you it's a Sony mini disc player, which is also very 2000s.
Yeah.
Sony was trying to make mini discs a replacement for CDs before Apple came out and made everybody decide that MP3s are the way to go.
Yes. All I could put down about this scene was Nevada must not be a two-way consent for audio recording.
Didn't Grissom say to him, "You got his permission to record him, right?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, then Brass says something like, "Oh yeah, he didn't realize what you guys science types can do with
You're right.
These things."
Okay. So I missed that. This is why it's good to have two of us watching these episodes, because we tend to bounce off each other and get the full picture from the two of our brains put together.
I also had that thought, and I think when I watched it a second time, I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's why he said that, because otherwise it could be inadmissible in court, and then all the fruits of the evidence would also become inadmissible."
Right, yeah. We shift on over to Catherine and Warwick inspecting the car. The seat is pushed all the way forward. Catherine asks Warwick to start the car, and as soon as he does, there is rap music playing very loudly, which prompts Catherine to...
I believe the song is Mathematica by Mos Def.
I only know it's Mos Def because they then reference Mos Def later in the... I apologize. Audience, I am not a hip-hop fan. I mean, I'm fine with it, but I'm not an aficionado, so...
Full disclosure, the only reason I know that is true is because it's not the year 2000, and my cell phone automatically identifies music for me. And it popped up and said, Mathematica by Mos Def. And I went, I don't think I've ever heard the name of that song before in my entire life. And then moments later, he says, Mos Def. I said, see, phone, you were right.
Phone is like, I'm smart. I know what that. And Catherine notes that no one over the age of 19 would be driving the car with this choice of music, and I guess the volume of music.
Yeah, it was quite loud, and it's the whole thing with the seat. So the
seat was like
tall.
pulled all the way up, and Warwick got into the seat and was all crunched up, and made
The
the
mirrors.
observation that like Mr. Moore wasn't like there was no way that he could have
Yeah,
been driving.
at first it was like old people drive close to the steering wheel, which is, I mean, we don't really go after people making fun of old people very much in terms of like social or political correctness.
Right.
That in of itself is kind of in line with the first season's attitude. However, then Warwick remarks that he says, these mirrors are doing nothing for me, meaning that like, okay, if you were going to sit this close to the steering wheel, fine, but like you should be able to see out of your mirrors.
Right.
So that means like, no, it's just somebody who's shorter, who's closer, which I don't, if it wasn't for the music, I would still be like, where's the old man's shorter wife, which
yeah.
who he was covering for. But then it's like, wait, but so he must have like a grandson or something. And so I didn't write this down, but I think at that point I was sold like, oh, okay, there's a grandson, there's a kid involved in this, and that's who he's covering for.
Yep. We move to Nick and an audio analyst looking.
Is that the same guy? No. Okay.
No. This
Same
I'm fairly certain.
Weird lab tech guy.
I'm fairly certain this is a one and done lab personnel.
They all have frosted tips and spiky hair.
It's
I
2000.
I can't tell all these white bro dudes apart.
Yeah, that's fair.
They all look the same to me.
We discovered that the voices match, and they talk for a little bit. I didn't take too many notes in this instance. I feel like beyond, and I can't remember if it's at this point or later where Grissom tells Nick to keep looking. I think it's later actually, but that's still somewhere to go on that the voices match, right? That's a good step in the right direction. We go back to Crime B, where Catherine and Warwick are interviewing/interrogating Mr. Moore, and then, as Nick predicted, in comes his grandson, James. And Catherine straight out asks him if James is the one who hit the girl on the scooter. Mr. Moore then tells, instead of saying just that it was an accident and no one else was in the car with him, he now tells a story about how it had been Mr. Moore driving when the accident occurred, but they switched seats because he was kind of shaken and James needed to drive him home. So at this point, they don't have enough evidence to show that James is the one that was behind the wheel. So they have to accept, or at least pretend to accept, Mr. Moore's story. Catherine offers to drive James home, which I don't know if that's a professional overstep. I think it's supposed to illustrate her like motherly instincts and how she's feeling about this case. He opts to take the bus, which I don't think I blame him.
I have something I want to point out that there's no real good place to point this out, but I'm pretty sure the grandfather and the grandson were the same clothes the entire episode on what clearly must be different days. Because they keep coming back in. And I think even when he's driving the car in the flashbacks, the grandson is wearing the same outfit. It's just a basketball jersey.
There wasn't a lot of wardrobe budget for season 1 of CSI, obviously.
It made me think, I wonder if like originally this was supposed to be more compact and they blew it up a little bit. And so then they had to come back, and so like the easiest way was to have them wear the same outfit the whole time. But at this point in the watch through, I was like, are they wearing the same clothes the whole time? And then later on I just wrote, yep.
Indeed. Warwick and Catherine have a pretty in-depth conversation after James leaves, where they both acknowledge that James was the sole driver. They need to go back to the car. And Catherine brings up this, like, wouldn't it be nice to help the good guys thought process, in the sense of, look, like, Mr. Moore's willing to take the hit and serve the time. And Warwick throws back to Grissom and says, no, we need to follow the evidence. That's our job, is to follow the evidence.
Yeah, I wrote that quote down. Got to follow the evidence. It's the job. It's a great juxtaposition to
Grissom saying it to him.
Yeah, to what got him into predicament last time. But he also says something about making a deal with the devil, which is, I think, foreshadowing / reminding you. I assume their judge does not appear in this episode, but I assume the Warwick Brown judge storyline is far from over.
Spoiler alert, it's not over yet.
Yeah.
That
is a spoiler for me. I don't know that.
I know. I gotta decide like what are worthy, like what's okay to spoil for you, and what. But there's things coming up that I want you to experience without
spoilers.
Me spoiling them. So I have to remind myself what is acceptable spoilers and what are not acceptable spoilers.
Thankfully, none of these streaming services have forced me to watch the next time on CSI.
Yes, no.
Where they like show you what's happening in the next episode, because I hate that.
Oh, okay. The next scene is where Grissom wants Nick to find something new on the tape, and Nick is acting a bit childish about this.
Oh yeah, they have like a hallway scene.
Yeah, they have a little hallway scene,
Like, what do you
a little
mean,
walk and
keep
talk,
looking?
as one of my podcasts that I listen to that talks about Star Trek says, a walk and talk.
Yep.
And then we move to Grissom and Catherine, and this is where he mentions her minor / major blow up about the party.
There are so many layers to that comment. First, it's bad enough to be like, he's like, "Are you feeling better now?"
Yes, like he's very condescendingly.
Like, "Are you ready to come out of timeout now?"
Right.
And then it's like, but then he's like, your minor / major blow up earlier, right? Like, there's so many other ways you could have referred to it. And it just like dog piles on like the insensitivity of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I suspect that the writing in this show evolves in time.
Yes, it does.
I think it's really obvious that from the people in the writer's room, there is a very chauvinistic spin on the writing in this season so far.
Yes. For sure.
But also, like, how much of this is just a time capsule
of the time?
Yeah, like, I mean, for what was probably considered a more PC way to have conversation.
Right.
In 25 years ago. But yeah, I was like, I heard that line. I was like, as soon as I heard it, I was like, it's one of those lines that just keeps popping up in the show. Like, it's so bad.
Yeah, it's not. It does get better. And I will say that Catherine takes it all in stride. And she goes on to talk about how she's worried that she's making Lindsay weird. And then Sarah comes out from one of the rooms and says, Come tape me up. That's what it is. Tape me up. I was trying to read my own notes. Come tape me up. And Grissom responds to Catherine, I love my work.
Yeah.
And then walks.
Also not appropriate.
Also not appropriate.
Since you're now the boss.
But this is also the same gentleman who in episode 1 thought that pushing somebody against the wall and kissing them passionately was like, whoa, that's really out there. And now when his coworker suggests getting taped up, he's all on board. So obviously his realm of okay in the kink scene is very different from the average person.
There's like a cheeky back and forth between those two characters that they haven't quite nailed the chemistry on. Like, I don't know. I assume they're pushing towards something there. But eventually, it's like she was being a little flirty with him, right? So
yeah,
he's a little
she didn't come out and straight face say, Grissom, please come tape me up.
She came out with a reenactment. She said,
"Yep,
hey, can you come tape me up?" And it's like, but then he's playing it. But yeah, his character has had many sides, right? And
yes.
I think that's true in like early shows. Like early on in shows, they're still for people listening to this podcast may not know this. One of my greatest hobbies is playing Dungeons and Dragons. And when you play a new character in Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of times it can take a long time to figure out what your character would actually do in any given situation.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times in shows it's like that too, where you're still, both the actors, the writers, the directors are all trying to find the identity of these characters, and so they'll eventually settle into it. But yeah, it was kind of a weird scene.
It does get better, I promise. And that transitions us over to Sarah showing Grissom what she has found, which includes that Laura, this is I think the first time they refer to Mrs. Garris as Laura.
Mm-hmm. That
Laura's hair was on the passenger seat, and that she sat back like a normal person in that passenger seat. So there's a conversation around, if you're actively kidnapping someone, even if they're knocked out, are you really going to just have them sitting on the passenger seat of your truck? Like, that seems to be fairly risky.
Not the best kidnapping vehicle in general. They don't really go
also
into that.
True.
Because like passed out in the back of your pickup truck, only slightly better.
Right. Yeah, not immensely better, just a bit better.
Stop at a light, some guy looks over, he's like, why is there an unconscious person in the back of your car?
She's just napping, taking a nap. This is another callback where Grissom mentions that he got a sample of blood for her, so they have run the sample of blood, and it shows that she never inhaled the Hathafane, or Healthafane. And Jim Brass walks in and says, again, I don't know if they've called him Chip at this point, but they say that he wants to strike a deal, and Grissom says, no deals, I know what he wants to give up already.
You know what he has to offer. Yeah. Which is her, because she wasn't on it.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, we didn't really talk about the fact that she had a black eye in the hospital.
I did a little bit.
Oh, you did? Yeah, so that was one of the things where it was also really confusing. It was like,
Because she said she didn't remember how she got it, that she had
Yeah.
been, like, knocked unconscious, so she must have gotten it, like, after she was knocked
Yeah.
unconscious from the halophane. Or
But
chloroform.
yeah,
She
I
wouldn't
feel
have
like
known.
I didn't really get the double cross. I should have gotten it from that, but that's what
Yep.
they are basically alluding to, right?
Yep, yep.
Is that there is a double cross here?
And we head back to Nick and Grissom. They're outside of headquarters. This is where Nick says that the audio has been mega enhanced. So not just normal enhanced, mega enhanced.
Yes.
And they found Nick apologizes because he realized that Grissom was pushing him to find more evidence because there was more evidence and he has found more evidence. Again, this doesn't seem as critical now that the package has been recovered, but you would think that Grissom would try to have a teaching moment with Nick when there's not a death timeline on the clock.
Yeah.
Like, this is not the time to be
True.
like, let's give the newbie as much time as he needs to figure this out.
Yeah, again, like what's the point of holding back that information? Like, you could teach people a lot of things in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, this is not a I'm sure there's plenty of cases where it's not on so much of a time crunch as this one. We go to Catherine investigating the car again. She finds a piece of something on the steering wheel, something white.
Yep.
And this is another, I'm not sure if they actually expected us to know or this is going to be a fun reveal later. But she shows it to Warwick and says, like, do I even have to tell you what this is? And he says, no, even my aunt so and
Betty
so
or something. Yeah.
could tell, and she's blind.
I have no idea what they've pulled out of the steering
Okay,
wheel.
that's what I get. I've seen this episode so many times that I now know, but I can't imagine that the first time I ever watched it that I was able to. So I feel like I felt like, oh, am I supposed to know this, or are you just like saving the big reveal for later?
I also wrote that I don't think it's a toenail this time.
Yeah, it's not a toenail this time. That's a good guess. That would be some impressive driving if that was a toenail. I'd be impressed.
Yeah, I feel like you could kind of deduce it's a tooth, but it's not like visually obvious. That I was trying to think like what would happen, and the reenactment on this later is priceless.
Oh, yeah.
The visual reenactment of this
Yeah.
later on is priceless. But yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, tooth in the steering wheel. Tooth in the steering wheel, but it's also like they pull it out. It's weird looking. It's like half white, half dark. Maybe just the lighting is weird.
It was probably just the lighting.
So, yeah.
So they're back to interrogating / questioning Mr. Moore. They ask him to see his teeth. He takes his dentures out and puts his dentures on the table so they can see right away that the piece of tooth did not come from his dentures. So there's another reenactment scene. And actually, no, sorry. James confesses. And then I think this is where the reenactment that you're referring to happens.
Yes.
Where we see his face come down on the steering wheel. And he has a very like shocked look on his face.
And then bounces back. And
Yes.
And like the only thing that happens is he loses the tip of his tooth. No, nothing else happens to his whole face.
Yeah, no like bloody nose, no anything else. Just a tiny little fragment of his tooth. So they have to take him into custody even though they don't want to, but both Catherine and Warwick say that they'll be witnesses for him. I assume character witnesses is what they're trying to infer,
like,
is that they'll be character witnesses.
It's the whole my grandfather told me to lie to you, right? They don't really talk about it, but sorry, Greta, you're still on the hook for a lot of lying to the police charges.
Yes, like misleading an investigation, obstruction of justice. Like, there's a lot of charges that could come down. They kind of make it seem like they're not going to pursue any of those.
But it's very TV hand wavy.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I apologize, listeners. I jumped ahead a little bit. So we moved to Grissom listening to the audio that Nick enhanced. This is where we learned that there was no halophane in the blood. So the scene where Sarah was taped up and then not taped up, they were going to test for it, but they didn't have the results back. This is when they get the results back, and this is where Grissom says that his theory of what happened, right, like how Sarah basically had the same question that you did, Nick. If she's in on it, why did she end up in the crate, buried in the desert? And Grissom's theory is greed.
Yeah, which they don't explain right away, but they notice it is the guy wants to keep all the money.
Yes.
Chip.
Yep. So we head back to the beautiful mansion of Mr. Garris, and Laura claims that she doesn't know Trainer. This is where I finally got his name. Parentheses, Chip.
Yeah, she calls him Chip, I think, at the end of the episode for the first time.
So she claims that she doesn't know Chip. Sarah and Grissom are kind of tag teaming their rebuttal to this, saying that their plan was to take the money and run away together. This is where we get the call back to the scratches. We see the scene where Chip is carrying Laura through the house to mimic or to stage the kidnapping, and that's where she scratches the door frame. They talk about the roadside phone, how Laura is probably in the truck at this point, and this is where they show the betrayal, where Chip, stops somewhere in the middle of the desert, is telling her, oh, like, I have another car over this hill for us to get into, and then this is when he punches her, causing the black eye, and she falls backwards, passed out into the crate.
Yeah, there's this scene with Nick. He shows up with the
this was right afterwards.
The Sony mini disc player.
Yep.
And plays the audio and shows the part where you can hear her voice on it, and sort of like convinces the husband that she really was in.
And this is another callback where he says, you can hear a lot if you listen.
Mm-hmm.
And then we hear Laura's voice once they like remove the car background sound and all this other very fancy stuff, which again, it's 2000. You hear Laura's voice saying, Chip, hurry up. And this is where the husband, I can't remember if we talked about this on audio or on break. This is where, I think you had brought this up, Nick. The husband asks, Mr. Garris asks, why didn't she just turn him in when they found her?
Yeah,
and Grissom says it's self-preservation. Like, if she turned him in, she'd have to turn herself in.
Yeah, earlier I alluded to in the hospital, like, why wouldn't she just, like, call him out, like, oh, yeah, it's my husband's trainer. He was my kidnapper. You know what I mean? Because then anything he says at that point forward is no one's going to take serious.
Maybe, but I mean, I think they were trying to address that with Chip coming in with an offer and Grissom saying, I know what the offer is. Meaning that he was going to turn Laura in.
But also, she was trying to protect herself because didn't want them to dig any deeper. Right.
Like, the affair probably would have been exposed if they dug deeper, which would have been probable cause.
I wrote at the end, the husband does not seem mad enough.
No, he seems pretty chill about the whole situation. Like, a little downtrodden, but not that bad.
He's like, oh, man, I guess you're right. My wife really did run away with the...
Yeah, like, oh, darn it.
No.
Yeah. Well, I still got my $2 million, though.
I got my $2 million back. He was really concerned about her. His character the whole time was like, what about my wife? What about my wife? What about my wife? And then, I mean, I feel like for a lot of people, having your wife cheat on you and try to run away with somebody and then rob you over it is more upsetting than your wife dying.
I don't know if it's more, but I would say it's up there. Like, it should be up there.
You lose the person you love, but they've betrayed your love in the process. So,
and stole from you.
Yeah, and they've shown wanton disregard and a lack of love for you.
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's double heartbreak.
It is. Triple, really. But we go into a bit of a nicer scene with Catherine and Lindsay at the park. Mm-hmm. And this is where Catherine learns that Lindsay just wanted some alone time with Mom. That's why she didn't want a birthday party. Her mom's not making her weird. She just wanted some alone time with Mom.
Still can't have her raise her scooter until she's 40, though.
True.
It's a very, like, heart-to-heart scene, right? Where they're like, oh, when you're older, like, it's very playful.
Yes.
And coy in that way. And it's...
I feel they've done the best job, and I think you brought this up in the previous episode. I think they've done the best job to date with humanizing Catherine. I think she's the most humanized out of like everybody on the show to this point.
Yeah, she's like the only person that you have any insight into her life.
Yes, her personal life, yeah. And we then go back to a not so nice... Well, it is a heartfelt scene, but it's a sad heartfelt scene where we're at the jail where James is being booked. And I know, again, this is for dramatic effect. I have to suspend disbelief. But I don't think your grandfather's allowed to, like, be there when you're booked into jail. I don't think that's how that works.
Your grandfather, who, by the way, was basically probably supposed to still be in jail. Because
if they actually charged him with anything.
Before setting him free.
Right. But we'll skip over that. But there's a heartfelt moment where they're kind of saying their goodbyes and stay strong. And Warwick gives him his phone number. And Mr. Moore tells him afterwards out in the hallway that he didn't have to do that. And this is a moment that humanizes Warwick a little bit, where we learn, at least to some degree, that his grandmother raised him or had some part in raising him. And he says his grandmother must have did something right. That Mr. Moore says that to Warwick after Warwick says, some things about his grandmother. And it just ends on a little bit of a strange, again, maybe this is humanizing Warwick a little bit, where he's still probably feeling terrible about what happened with Holly Gribbs, where his response is maybe. when Mr. Moore says that his grandmother must have did something right raising him.
Yeah, it also reflects on him value, like not just Holly Graves, but also what's going on with the judge and gambling. It's like his own personal self-worth, right? He says he's turning over a new leaf, but there's a sense of atonement
Yes.
in this storyline too, right? So he feels like he has something to atone for. So, in other words, like he's not as innocent. He's about as innocent as the grandson is.
Yeah. Yeah.
James, right?
James, yes. All right, so that wraps up Crate and Burial. What did you think, Nick? What's your brief recap? How did you feel about the episode? And then I'll give a very, very brief how I feel about this episode. But I don't want mine to color yours.
Overall, I like the episode because it's a little different. I feel like the pacing of the show in general is getting a lot better. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like it's starting to feel like a normal episode of a show that's been on. I think I did pretty well in my predictions.
You did. I'm impressed.
Which is, I think, the best I've done. I mean, it's only the third episode, but that made hold for a while. Yeah, I liked it. It's almost in a lot of ways a bit of a filler episode though, because it really could have stood by itself at almost any point in the series or in the season potentially. But yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, so I will admit, this is not one of my favorite episodes, and I can't. It's so funny. I watched it, so we watch these episodes twice before we record, and I can't put my finger on why I don't particularly like this episode. Maybe it's because I want my standard CSI, two people died, we're investigating their murders plot, and I don't get that, and maybe that's what bothers me about this episode. I don't know, but I don't hate it. It's just definitely not one of my favorites.
How would you compare it to the last episode? Because I only have an N of 3 to compare this to.
Yeah, that is true.
And you have an N of 500, so
yes.
I'm like, I think the show's getting better, and it's settling in, and I'm thinking about all the things that are a new show has to do, and it's finding an audience. And
I felt like the last episode for me went by a lot faster, and this one dragged a little bit. This one felt longer, and not in a good, I'm so glad that this is longer so I can have more of it. It was more so in the, this is still going on. I don't want this to be necessarily going on anymore.
I feel like the grandfather, grandson hit and run storyline was pretty drawn out.
Yes.
I feel like I was thinking this show typically has 3 plot lines, and I was like, in reality, they basically had a part A and a part B.
Yes. This one was only A and B storylines.
You could almost imagine this storyline being across 2 episodes with something else going on. And in the first episode, they rescue the wife, and in the second episode, they find out that she was in on it. But I actually, as the episodes go, it's the most polished episode. I feel like the second episode feels more like what I expect a standard CSI episode to be like.
Yeah.
And I imagine we'll see a lot. The only weird part of the last episode was they don't mention Holly Gribb's name, but once this whole episode.
Yeah, she comes up once in this episode.
I don't imagine they mentioned her at all come season 2 and onward.
I don't know if they, she might get mentioned once or twice in the rest of this season. I don't think there's much beyond that.
So it's once they kind of get past this, what was good about this episode is it didn't have any of the baggage of the pilot episode.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And so that's one of the things I liked about it. But it made me feel like the show is becoming a show, right? We're not trying to sell you on a storyline anymore. Now we're just going to make episodes for plot lines.
Yep.
And I'm 5 episodes from now. That's all they're going to be doing.
All right.
So that should be good.
We'll see if your prediction is correct. We will be back next week with season 1, episode 4, Pledging Mr. Johnson.
Oh, I didn't know what it was called.
Yeah, Pledging Mr.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. The title of the next episode is called Pledging Mr. Johnson.
That's the alternative name of this podcast.
Yes, Pledging Mr. Johnson.
No, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert for a show that's been out for 23 years. Oh, good.
If we ever have merch, that would be my first design would be a t-shirt that says spoiler alert. If you haven't seen this 23-year-old show.
Someone designed that for us. Send it in. Actually, if you want to send it in, you can follow us on Facebook at Who Are You, a CSI Podcast. We are also on Twitter and Instagram at Who Are You CSI Pod, or you can send us an email at whoareyoucsipod@gmail.com. So again, we will be back next week where we review Pledging Mr. Johnson.